Again, welcome to Freedom. It's always great to see you. Glad to have you here on this last day of July, and to everybody who's joining us online. Thanks so much for tuning in. We love that you take part in worship in that way. We are continuing to march through the book of 2 Samuel in this series that's entitled Finishing Well. If you've got your Bibles, I'm going to invite you to go ahead and turn with me to 2 Samuel chapter 15. And we'll begin in chapter 14, but we'll barely touch on that. And just put it in high gear because we've got a big story to cover today. What we're going to be talking about today, as Melissa already alluded to, is overcoming the major setbacks that we have in life. And in this whole series about finishing well, this is an important part of the series because of this I'm convinced. First of all, we don't want to imagine this, we don't want to think this, and yet it's just real life. Most of us, somewhere in the course of our lives, at least one time along the way, are going to experience some kind of unplanned, unpredictable, major setback. Something that you never wanted to happen, something that you probably didn't see coming far in advance, and suddenly it was upon you. And in the moment, it may feel like it's going to completely overwhelm you and undo you. And it has the potential, if you let it, to redirect the course of the rest of your life. If you're going to finish well, this is going to be the pivotal moment. This is going to be the pivotal season, because how you respond in this window of time, more than probably just about anything else in your life, is going to determine whether you live the rest of your life well or not. And it comes in so many different forms, doesn't it? I mean, you think about all the different things that can come our way. It can be a major health crisis. It can be a major health crisis for someone in our immediate family that now we're going to spend the rest of our lives taking care of them. It can be a sudden death, somebody that we thought was going to be with us for the rest of our days, and suddenly they're not with us. It can come in so many different forms, a huge financial setback, a career change, just so many different things that can come our way. But for most of us, something is going to come, and how we handle that is really, really important. Well, what we're going to look at today is one of those moments which I think for David was probably the biggest setback moment of his entire life, the one that was going to test him as much as anything that he'd ever been through before. And as I said, this is a big story. Don't get nervous on me, but I'm going to cover 6 chapters in one sermon. So the telling of the story is going to be half the sermon. So just relax and enjoy the story, and then we're going to take a few minutes to unpack that when we're done. In chapter 14, because there's so much scripture here, I'm going to read just slices of this, and I'll fill in the blanks to tell you the rest of the story. If you weren't here the last week or two, just to bring you up to speed, David has experienced some real chaos in his personal life, makes a terrible decision, has an affair, gets the woman pregnant, has her husband killed to try and cover up and to claim her for himself. So terrible season in his life. And then the next thing that we read about is all the chaos in David's life that ensues, not only the death of an infant child, but among his adult children. How his oldest son, the crown prince, rapes one of David's daughters, and then a couple of years later, the second in line for the throne, Absalom, kills the crown prince. And it's this chaotic scene. And so Absalom has fled for 3 years, hiding out from the king, wondering how the king's ever going to respond. And David's doing nothing to try and reach out or make this right. He's just angry at the chaos in his family. That's where we pick up in chapter 14. Well, Absalom lives, as I said, for 3 years, cut off from the palace, from his father the king, all the good stuff that he had known in life. That's bugging him, but it's also eating at David. He doesn't like the fact that the one who is going to inherit his throne, and the son who you naturally like Absalom. People are attracted to him, good-looking guy, and David misses Absalom. And Joab, who is David's commander-in-chief, he's the leading general, but he's also David's friend and confidant. And Joab knows that David's heart is grieved over the separation from his son. And so he orchestrates the situation. We won't go back and unpack all of that, read all of that, but he orchestrates the situation to make David realize what a terrible mistake that he's making, staying apart from his son. And he persuades David to have, after 3 years, to have Absalom brought back to Jerusalem. And so you think, all right, well, good. That's a healthy step. They're working toward getting back together. However, when you read verse 23, it's a head scratcher because after he sends word, bring Absalom back, it says in verse 23 of chapter 14, then Joab went to Geshur and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem. But the king said, he must go to his own house. He must not see my face. So Absalom went to his own house, and he did not see the face of the king, and he didn't see him for 2 solid years. Still a pretty dysfunctional family, isn't it? I mean, it's that weird situation, and some of you have lived through a season like this where there's this weird deal where Absalom is angry at his dad because dad didn't do anything to make this right about the whole rape of the daughter, and Dad, why didn't you do this? And why did you leave it to me to have to kill my brother? And, you should be the one to have to reach out. And David's mad at the son because he's going, you made all this chaos in my family. You killed my son, the one who was going to be the heir to the throne. And so they're both kind of sitting back going, well, it's really his deal to come to me and to make that right. And guess what happens when 2 people do that? Nothing. That's exactly right. People stay apart. And so they lived that way for 2 years. And Absalom's just really getting frustrated. And he goes to Joab. Well, actually, he tries to go to Joab. He sends word for Joab to come to him. And Joab, at this point, is just kind of like, look, I did what I could do. Obviously, that didn't work, and I'm staying out of this. And Absalom, you get this sense of he's the spoiled son of the king, so you better listen to me. And so when Joab won't come, when Absalom keeps sending word, you know what Absalom has done next? He tells his servants, Joab's field, his barley field, is next to ours. Go out and set fire to his field. I bet that'll get his attention. He won't pay attention to my messages. So sure enough, he burns down Joab's barley field, and it works because Joab shows up and is like, what did you just do? And he's like, why wouldn't you listen when I called you? I told you to come. And, well, all right, you've got my attention. And he says, why in the world did the king bring me back? I can't even see him. Haven't seen him once in 2 years. I'd have been better off to stay in the foreign country I was living in. And so at this point, Joab's like, you're right. I'll go to your dad and I'll talk to him. So at the end of chapter 14, verse 33, so Joab went to the king and told him this. And then the king summoned Absalom, and he came in and he bowed down with his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. And everybody goes, oh, they're back together, father and son, all happy and good. Don't you wish? Don't you wish it was that simple? They have spent 5 years estranged from each other, and that is not all healed with one hug and a kiss, is it? All those years of rehearsing frustration and hurt, yeah, they just kissed and made up, but not so much really. We pick up in the first verse of chapter 15. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with a chariot and horses and with 50 men to run ahead of him. What is Absalom doing here? Oh, it's not hard to picture what he's up to here. He knows that he's next in line for the throne, but he's got a big problem. First of all, he's having to live basically as a self-imposed exile in a foreign country. He knows the whole nation of Israel knows about this. How are you going to ever inherit the throne when you can't even live in your own country? Well, he's come back, but now the word has spread. Dad doesn't even see me. Dad doesn't talk to me. And so he thinks, I've got to start portraying a different image. If people are ever going to embrace me as their king, they've got to see me as somebody important. So he goes out and buys a Mercedes chariot, and he hires 50 men to run ahead of him wherever he goes. What's he saying with that? I'm important. I mean, it's the equivalent of when you see a motorcade that's got, like multiple state troopers with their lights flashing and a limo in between. Listen, it could be a pauper in that limo. We think they're important, don't we, because of those flashing lights and the stretched limo. We're like, I want to know who's in that thing. He's using that trick. He's got the shiniest chariot and 50 guys running ahead of him. Maybe 50 bums for all we know, but, you put 50 people running ahead of you, it's like, that's an important guy. So he's setting the stage for what he's about to do. Verse 2, he would get up early and stand outside on the road leading to the city gate. And whenever anyone came with a complaint to be placed before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him, what town are you from? And he would answer, your servant is from one of the tribes of Israel. And when Absalom would say to him, look, your claims are valid and proper, but there's no representative of the king to hear you. And Absalom would add, if only I were appointed judge in the land, then everyone who has a complaint or a case would come to me, and I would see that they receive justice. You see what he's doing there, don't you? I mean, this is shrewd. He sets up camp just outside the city so that people don't have a chance to see on the days when the king would be able to receive them. They just assume he's telling the truth, and he intercepts everybody who comes in. And, oh, I wish the king had time for you, but he never does. Such a shame I couldn't be set up as the judge, because you're right. You deserve justice, and I'd make sure that you got it if I were the man in charge. Then it goes on to say, also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand and would take hold of him, and he would kiss him. And Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice. And so he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. He did this for 4 years. I mean, that is slick, isn't it? He's royalty. And, people know when they come in, this is the crown prince. So they would immediately bow down. He's like, no, you don't have to do that. I'm one of you. We're just like, he'd pick them up, hug them, kiss them. We share a bond. And they'd feel the love for 4 years. He turned one heart after another against the king and toward himself. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, let me go down to Hebron and fulfill a vow that I made to the Lord. And while your servant was living in Geshur and Aram, I made this vow that if the Lord takes me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron. So the king said to him, go in peace. So he went to Hebron, but he was lying. This was going to be the moment that it all turns on. And then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet. See, he's got this whole series of these guys set up around the country. When you hear the trumpet, you blow your trumpet so it just spreads. Now down the line, somebody else blows the horn. That's going to be the moment. You stand and when you hear that, as soon as you hear the sound of the trumpet, say, Absalom is king in Hebron. 200 men from Jerusalem had accompanied Absalom. Now, they had been invited as guests, and they went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. And while Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for Ahithophel, the Gilonite, David's counselor, his closest trusted advisor, to come from Gilo in his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. Man, this was such a well thought out plan. So he slips off over to Hebron, and he invites 200 of the leading officials in Jerusalem who have no idea what he's up to go with him for this big celebration. What's he doing? He's taking so many of the key leaders in Jerusalem, people that David would rely on, and he's taking them to Hebron. Why? Because he can close the gates on that city, and he controls what they do and where they go. They can be loyal to him, or they can face the consequences. Man, he has set this thing up. And now they sound the trumpet, and the word spreads all over the country. Absalom is now the king. What on earth is David going to do? Verse 13, well, a messenger came and told David, the hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom. And then David said to all of his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, come, we must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin on us and put the city to the sword. The king's officials answered him, your servants are ready to do whatever our lord the king chooses. So the king set out with his entire household following him, but he left 10 concubines to take care of the palace. Those lines are still so hard to read. He's having to flee with his 8 wives, but he's going to leave his 10 concubines back for Absalom and to take care of the palace. Oh, that is just a reflection that everybody's broken, including this wonderful leader named David. So the king set out with all the people following him, and they halted at the edge of the city, and all of his men marched past him, along with the Kerethites, the Pelethites, that's his royal guard, and with the 600 Gittites who had accompanied him from Gath, who marched before the king. It is a sad, sad sight. And don't make a mistake in how you read this. David is not a coward. I mean, you could on the surface of that think, well, what a chicken. He's running from the fight. But oh, no. David realizes in this moment, Absalom has spent 4 years setting this thing up. He has set it up well. And if I just sit here and wait for him to come back, so many of the people that I love and really care for, they're going to be butchered in this whole thing. The only way that I can keep them safe is I've got to get them out of town immediately. So Absalom is marching in from Hebron. He and his followers coming in from the southwest. And so David gathers up everyone, and immediately, they don't take time to collect any of what they're going to need. They just, on a moment's notice, flee, and they take off to the northeast. They are trying to just get as far from the city as fast as they can, but they have one major problem. David isn't leading an army. Yes, there are armed men there, but he's bringing along children, women, old people, all of his household, and this is going to be a very slow procession. This is not going to be a fast-moving group, and Absalom's going to be moving very rapidly, so he's got a major issue. How are we going to get, we've got to get to the other side of the Jordan at the very least to be able to try and rally some support and figure out some kind of response. And so David knows something's going to have to intervene and help here. And the whole country appears to have turned against him. So what direction do you turn when the whole country's against you? What direction do you run? He doesn't know that any town is going to be safe. And so he just goes opposite direction of Absalom. And as he goes, he's got some armed men who are with him. 600 of them are Philistines from Gath, which is an interesting little twist. So David knows it's going to be important. He's got to leave some spies, and he's got to try and sort of poison the counsel that Absalom's going to get. So he leaves the 2 high priests and their 2 sons so that they can track what's going on and send word. By the way, David was so good at setting up a spy network. He learned to do this when Saul pursued him for 10 years. And so he's setting up another sort of spy network to keep him informed. But along the way, David realizes too, terrible news, his closest friend and advisor, Ahithophel, has turned against him and has sided with Absalom. Once again, a tragic spin-off effect of what he did with Bathsheba, because this is Bathsheba's granddaddy. He knows what David did with his granddaughter and with his grandson-in-law, and it came back to bite David here. And David knows Ahithophel is really wise, and we are in trouble. If Absalom follows his advice, we're going to have a really hard time surviving this. And so he sends his second most important advisor, Hushai, to go back, and he's just praying, oh God, let Hushai's advice thwart the counsel of Ahithophel. And he sends him back to be Absalom's advisor, and he's like, get back into town as fast as you can, try and get there ahead of Absalom, and tell him that you support him. So he sets all that up, and now he's marching out of town, and he's weeping as he goes. Verse 30 of chapter 15, David continued up the Mount of Olives. He's just across the Kidron Valley where you're looking back on the city. So he continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered. He was barefoot. And all the people with him covered their heads too and were weeping as they went up. Now David had been told Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. So David prayed, Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness. It's just this most painful scene. The king. The same king who just a few chapters before had moved so boldly and courageously to take that city when none of the generations before him had had the courage to attempt to take Jerusalem. And David had trusted God for that city. Just a few chapters before, the same king who brought the Ark of the Covenant into the city, and he danced and celebrated and worshiped the Lord with all of his might as he came into the city. And now we're to a tragic turning point where he's marching down the hill out of that same city, but now he's barefoot and his head is covered, and he isn't even trying to hide his emotion. He is just weeping openly, and everyone around him is weeping because it feels like everything is lost. And if that isn't enough, we're going to have insult added to injury. Chapter 16, verse 5. As King David approached Bahurim, a man from the same clan as Saul's family came out there. Remember, so this guy belonged to the family of the first king, and he's still feeling like my family should still be on the throne. His name was Shimei, and he was the son of Gera, and he cursed as he came out, and he pelted David and all of the king's officials with stones, though all the troops and the special guard were on David's right and left. And as he cursed, Shimei said, "Get out! Get out, you murderer, you scoundrel. The Lord has repaid you for all the blood you shed in the household of Saul, in whose place you have reigned. The Lord has given the kingdom into the hands of your son Absalom. You have come to ruin because you are a murderer." What's the king going to do with that? I mean, he's still surrounded by hundreds of armed men who will lay down their lives for him. And then Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, said to the king, "Why should this dead dog curse my lord the king? Let me go over and cut off his head." There's a good response from a soldier. That is a soldier's response, isn't it? "We'll take care of this for you, sir. We'll just go cut his head off right now." But the king said, "What does this have to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah? If he is cursing because the Lord said to him, 'Curse David,' then who can ask, 'Why do you do this?'" Okay, I want to stop there for just a second. It's a crazy scene. And yet, in a way, it makes so much sense. David is so overwhelmed by what is happening, and he's so eaten up with guilt, wondering, did I cause all of this? Did I bring all of this on myself? So when this crazy man comes out here, and he's literally just smacking them with stones, he's cursing them, and he is calling out, and the problem with what he's crying out is everything he's saying, he's telling the truth. He's calling out David's worst sins. I mean, David can't defend himself really because everything that he's saying is true. And so what does David do? When the people around David are like, "Nobody gets to say this about my king. We're going to kill this guy right now. Just give us the word, sir." And David says, "Nope, I'm not giving you the word. In fact, who knows? God's probably the one that sent him out to say all that stuff." Do you see what happened in that moment? God hasn't sent this fool to go out and curse the king and to announce David's sins to the world and to pelt them with stones. That is not the hand of God. But when you are overcome with setbacks, terrible things happening, and when it feels like everyone is against you, in that moment we are most prone to internalize that and to say, "I probably deserve it, and that's probably God doing it. It's probably God. This whole thing's probably just God. All of my sins have caught up with me. God's been mad at me, and now he's given me what I deserve. And on top of everything else that I've lost, here's this fool going to throw dirt on me, throw rocks at me, and curse me and announce my sins to the world. I can't even argue with it. It's just probably how God feels about me." You ever been there? You ever been to that place where you're so low that the bad things that happen to you, you start going, "That's probably just God. I probably have just hit my day of reckoning, and God is probably the one who just brought all that down on me." It's not because God's actually doing it. It's just how we start to think and feel in the face of these kinds of terrible trials. Well, David then, verse 11, said to Abishai and of all of his officials, "My son and my own flesh and blood is trying to kill me. How much more then this Benjamite? So leave him alone. Let him curse, for the Lord told him to. It may be that the Lord will look upon my misery and restore me to his covenant blessing instead of his curse today." So David and his men continued along the road, while Shimei was going along on the hillside opposite him, cursing as he went and throwing stones at him and showering him with dirt. And then the king and all the people with him arrived at the destination exhausted. And there he refreshed himself. Isn't that an understatement? I mean, you're running for your life, and all the while, this guy is on a hillside overlooking them, and the whole way the fool will not stop throwing rocks and dirt and cursing. I mean, how long does it take before that gets really old? Don't you know the writer's almost chuckling as he writes, "They finally got there, and boy, were they exhausted. Don't you know it? And dirty, because he's throwing rocks and dirt." It's just such a poignant picture of how it can feel when you're going through that toughest season in your life, like the enemy is just pelting you with rocks and dirt the whole way, and you just wind up exhausted. But they get to a resting point, and now just to kind of fill in the blanks on the next part of the story. So Absalom gets to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel is with him, and Absalom, he obviously isn't a really bright guy like his dad, so he's really relying on Ahithophel. He says, "All right, here we are. What do we do next?" And Ahithophel says, "Well, here's the first thing you need to do." He left 10 of his concubines behind, and I'm sorry for the sort of graphic nature of this, it's just the story. He says, the first thing you do is you go up on the rooftop of the palace. We'll set up a tent for you, and I want you to have sex with every one of his concubines. I want you to do it where the whole country can see it happen. And what they're going to read into that is, everything that David owned, you now own, including his women. The message will be unmistakable. He's like, I'm down with that. We'll check that box right off. What do we do after that? And he did. It's exactly what he did. And the terrible irony in that is, this is the same rooftop from which David observed Bathsheba and got in trouble. That's the same rooftop that his son goes and defiles the 10 women that David had in his own household. So he does that, and he says, all right, that was good advice on round one there, Ahithophel. What do I do next? And Ahithophel says, all right, well, here's the next thing that you need to do. You need to immediately gather the 12,000 men that we could gather right here in Jerusalem and the surrounding area, and we could take off just almost on a moment's notice, and we could give pursuit to David. We will be able to overtake him. He's moving slowly, and we need to just go annihilate him quickly before he has time to get out of this region. Go do it quickly. And he's like, that sounds good. Kill him fast, and there will be no one who can deny that I'm going to be the king. Well, Absalom pauses and says, well, summon also Hushai. Who is Hushai? He's the second advisor that David sent back to plant bad advice. So verse 5, Absalom said, summon also Hushai the Archite, so we can hear what he has to say as well. Well, when Hushai came to him, Absalom said, Ahithophel has given this advice. Should we do what he says? And if not, give us your opinion. Well, I'll summarize what he said back as his opinion. He said, normally Ahithophel gives good advice. In this instance, not so much, because David is a fierce warrior. And he's been on the run like this before. Remember, he spent 10 years like this. And I can tell you, I know him, he's not with his troops. He's not with any of the other people. He's hiding in a cave somewhere. He's like Osama bin Laden. You're never going to find him. You'll send your men out, and they'll overtake his party, but they won't find the king because he's way too smart for that. And your troops, your smaller army, is going to possibly be ambushed, and you could suffer a defeat there, and you might lose the country before you've even really gotten a hold of it. Do not send out a small army. You're not going to kill David. What you need to do is send word from Dan to Beersheba, from the northern end of the country to the southern end of the country, and you need to raise a vast army. You don't need 12,000. You need 10 times that many people. You need to raise up an army that is so great, there's no way that David and his followers could oppose it, and then you march out in strength. You don't send the army out. You march out with the army. You lead them into battle, and it doesn't matter where he goes. If he hides in a city, you'd go with an army so vast, you can just tear down the walls of that city, and you can destroy the king, and you'll be leading that charge, okay? And Absalom says, well, you know what? In this instance, I think Hushai gave even better advice than Ahithophel. I'm going to do what he said. Now, the scary thing about what Hushai is saying is he's smart because he knows I've just got to buy the king some time. I've got to give them time to get out of the country, cross the Jordan, get to a place that they can find some safety and regroup. The scary thing is Absalom is going to do what he said, and he does. He sends word out all over the country to gather this vast army, and he does gather a bigger army. Thankfully, the country is still of divided opinion, so he doesn't gather this vast army that he had imagined, but he does gather a much bigger army, and now they march out in force, most importantly, with Absalom leading the charge. And now the showdown is on. They go in pursuit to where David is, but David has now had time. He's had time to send out his people to rally the folks who are faithful to him and to increase the size of his following, and he has now organized his people. And I want to tell you, of all the fighting men that you could ever have to go up against, you do not want to have to oppose David and his army in this part of the world. This joker knows how to get it done. That's where we are when you get to the opening of chapter 18. So David mustered the men who were with him and appointed over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. David sent out, you recognize in that A lot of faithful folks have shown up now to support him, given a little bit of time. So David had sent out his troops, a third under the command of Joab, a third under Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and a third under Ittai the Gittite. And the king told the troops, I myself will surely march out with you. But the men said, you must not go out. If we are forced to flee, they won't care about us. Even if half of us die, they won't care. But you are worth 10,000 of us. It would be better now for you to give us support from the city. And the king ordered, I will do whatever seems best to you. So the king stood beside the gate while all of his men marched out in units of hundreds and of thousands. And the king commanded Joab, Abishai, and Ittai, be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake. And all the troops heard the king giving orders concerning Absalom to each of the commanders. So David, he's a fighting man. He wants to go out with the troops. And they say, sir, understand the battle is over if they get to you. There's nothing left to fight for if they kill you. We've got to keep you back here. Let us go in and take care of business, and you stay back here. And so they march out by hundreds and by thousands. And as his senior leaders go by, you just hear David's aching, split, broken heart saying, hey guys, I wish you well, but please be gentle with my son. That's got to be a tough marching order, doesn't it? You're going out to face an army of tens of thousands who are bent on killing you, and the commander of that army, your commander, is saying, but just be gentle with the son over there who's leading them. Just be gentle, show him mercy. Well, David's army marched out of the city to fight Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. There Israel's troops were routed by David's men, and the casualties that day were great. 20,000 men. Let that sink in. 20,000 died in the forest that day. I mean, I'm a student of history and of wars. I want to tell you, 20,000 is an incredibly bloody day. 20,000 died that day. The battle spread out over the whole countryside. This is a really weird thought. And the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. They're fighting in a thick forest. I mean, how crazy is that to realize more people died by the holes they fell in and the things that they got into than at the hands of other people? That is a tough setting. Well, Absalom happened to meet David's men in the middle of the fray. He was riding his mule. And okay, let me set up this one thing about this. One of the passages that we skipped earlier about Absalom was, he's a really good-looking guy. Everybody admires Absalom for his looks. And he loved his long, flowing locks. And it said, he would only cut his hair once a year, and they would weigh his hair when they would cut it, and he would get 5 pounds of hair cut off one time a year when he got it cut. So it's like, I guess he was sending it for locks for love or something. He's cutting his hair off once a year, and so it's, don't hate me because my hair looks so good kind of thing. Well, so Absalom is riding on his mule as he encounters David's men, and it says that as he was riding his mule went under thick branches of a large oak, and Absalom's hair got caught up in the tree, and he was left hanging in midair while his mule he was riding on kept going. And then one of the men saw what had happened and told Joab, I just saw Absalom hanging from an oak tree. Okay, tell me that there isn't some meaningful irony to this story. This guy who is he is so cocky, he's so full of himself and how he looks, and in the middle of the battle, his long flowing locks get caught in a tree and the mule keeps on trucking. And he is literally hanging by the hair of his head when David's troops come along. And it's kind of comical because they're like, I think that's the guy in charge of the whole other army. But the king said, don't hurt him. So what do? We go find our commanding general. So they go find Joab, and they said, you're not going to believe what we just saw. We're pretty sure we just saw the king's son, their commander. Well, where was he? Well, he was hanging from a tree by his hair. And Joab's like, are you kidding me? And you just left him hanging there? Well, yeah, it seemed like the thing to do. So Joab said, I'm not going to wait like this for you. So he took 3 javelins in his hand, and he plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor bearers surrounded Absalom and struck him and killed him. And then Joab sounded the trumpet, and the troops stopped pursuing Israel, for Joab halted them. And then they took Absalom, and they threw him in a big pit in the forest, and they piled up a large heap of rocks over him. And meanwhile, all of the Israelites fled to their homes. So the opposing army that had followed Absalom tucks tail and goes running back. And now they have the challenge of going and delivering good news and bad news to the king. The good news, we won the battle and the enemy has fled. The bad news is your son is dead and in a hole in the ground with a bunch of rocks on top of him. So 2 messengers go separately to deliver the message to David. The first one chickens out at the last minute because he realizes David tends to kill people who come and bring bad news after a battle, so he chickens out. The second guy tells the rest of the story. So in verse 32, the king asked the Cushite messenger, "Is the young man Absalom safe?" And the Cushite replied, "May the enemies of my lord the king and all who rise up to harm you be like that young man." David knew what that meant. And the king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and he wept. And as he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son." Not exactly the inspiring response from the king that the troops would hope for. Well, Joab was told the king is weeping and mourning for Absalom. And for the whole army, the victory that day turned into mourning because that day the troops heard it said, "The king is grieving for his son." And the men stole into the city that day as men steal in who are ashamed when they flee from battle. And the king covered his face and cried aloud, "Oh, my son Absalom, oh, Absalom, my son, my son." It's turning into a pathetic scene, isn't it? Praise God for faithful friends. Then Joab went into the house of the king, and he said, "Today you have humiliated your men who have just saved your life and the lives of your sons and your daughters and the lives of your wives and your concubines. You love those who hate you, and you hate those who love you. You have made it clear today to the commanders and that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would have been pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you don't go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all of the calamities that have come on you from your youth until now." Do you get what Joab just said? I know you're hurting, but what you're doing is absurd. And you think about all the bad things that have happened to you before. If you don't get your act together and do what you need to do today, the calamity that is about to come is going to surpass everything you've experienced before. Now get out there and receive your men. So the king got up and he took his seat in the gateway. And when the men were told the king is sitting in the gateway, they all came in before him. Meanwhile, the Israelites had fled to their homes. What he did was, he formally assumed the position of the king to receive them back properly from battle. And then in verse 14, David moved forward and he went on to win the hearts of the men of Judah so that they were all of one mind. These are the guys who had turned against him. So they were all of one mind, and they sent word to the king, "Return, you and all of your men." And then the king returned and went as far as the Jordan. David was reinstalled as king, and he reigned for the rest of the days of his life. Okay, that's a lot of story, isn't it? That's a lot going on. Whew. Now, we're going to take just a few minutes to sort of unpack what we've just read and how that speaks to us. The first part, if you want to pull out your outline, the first part of what I'm going to say, I'm really not going to preach. I just to lay it out sort of point by point is just to recognize the setbacks that David faced. We're talking about dealing with setbacks. Consider the 5 major setbacks that David faced. First of all, his child rebelled against him. Anybody in the room ever had a child rebel? Well, God bless the rest of you with your hands down. I'm glad for it. I'm kidding. A lot of us have experienced that. That is a painful thing, isn't it? I'm not talking about when they just say, "I don't want to clean my room." I'm talking about real rebellion. Oh, my goodness. When you've got a child truly in rebellion, that is a painful thing. Well, David experienced that at a whole other level. Like, I'm out to hurt you. I'm out to take what is yours, which brings us to the second thing. The second major setback was his job as king was taken from him. This is the thing he was born to do. He was wired through and through to be a king, to be a leader. snatched from him in a moment of time. This is going to happen to a lot of people. Oh, you may not be king, but the thing that you've been doing for years, it's your calling, it's your career. A lot of you have lived through this before. In a moment of time, you find out that isn't your job anymore. This isn't going to be your career. What do? Third thing that happened, he had to abandon his home and run for his life. Have you been through that before? Where you thought, I'm going to be in this community or I'm going to be in this house for years and years, and things happen, things change, the economy changes, your situation changes, and suddenly the life that you thought you were going to have is not going to be your future, and you have to leave that home. You may have to leave that community, what had been such a steadying thing for you. This is home. It's not home anymore. Not going to be where you live. Fourth thing that happened, his most trusted friend and advisor, Ahithophel, turned against him. You don't have to raise your hands on this, but anybody in the room been through a divorce before? And had people that you knew would always love you and be there for you, that suddenly you decide they must have moved to the North Pole because you never heard or seen from them since the day you went through that dark season in your life? Whew, I could write a chapter of a book on that one. People that you thought would always stand with you that completely abandoned you. Fifth, on top of all that, he was verbally attacked and cursed. As if it's not bad enough to just walk through those experiences, to have a lot of somebody's bad-mouthing you, talking about you while it's going on. It's just like one more dagger to the heart. And David's facing all of this at the same time. Can we agree David has experienced the kind of major setbacks that could change the course of the rest of your life? If you're in David's shoes, don't you think that you're believing in that moment, life as I have known it is over. I'll never get it back. It's gone. Where does your head go when you face major setbacks in life? Well, David responded in some really important ways that become for us a model of how we respond. Now, not everything that he did was exactly right. Praise God, he had some encouragement and correction and help to get him back on course. But there are at least 4 things that David did in responding to these setbacks that model for us some things that we need to do in the face of great difficulty. So these 4 that I want us to take notice of today. The first is this. The first thing we can say is David lamented his losses. He asked for God's help, and he declared his faith in God. We can just kind of roll that all together. David didn't try and hide his pain. He didn't try and keep a stiff upper lip. I mean, when you read the Psalms, that's one of the things that's so striking about David is he was a man who was so expressive about what he felt. Well, if he was on top of the world, if he was full of faith, you could see it. If he was feeling overwhelmed, he let that out. I mean, and David is feeling crushed, and he shows that he's weeping, he's barefoot, he's got his head covered. It's interesting to me that when you read the Psalms, and David didn't write all of the Psalms, but he wrote a bunch of them, that there are several Psalms that were written by David while he was fleeing from Absalom, which there's a little message in that to recognize that a lot of times it's the most painful experiences that God will use the most profoundly to touch us and to touch others. It's like when everything's going smoothly, it's probably not anything all that profound that you're learning or people are learning who are watching you. But man, when David's going through this, thankfully, he is writing down his prayers and his thoughts. And so we've got a bunch of Psalms that came from David during this exact season. Psalms 3 and 4, 61, 62, and 63, at least those 5 are believed to have been written while David was on the run. And I want to just read a few of I'll read you passages from 3 of those Psalms, just so you have a sense of what David is saying and doing. It is believed that Psalm 4 may have been penned on the night of the day that David is first having to flee. I mean, they don't know what's going to happen. It is chaos. They're on the run. And David says, "Answer me when I call to you, my righteous God. Give me relief from my distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer." What's he doing? He's going, "God, I need you. I'm desperate. Help me." That's a good prayer. That is a good prayer. He concludes that psalm with this passage that I have quoted so many times in my life. In peace I will lie down and sleep, for you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. This is such a pattern of David's prayers. He will say so clearly and so loudly, God, it's bad. It's really bad. You better show up or it's going to be terrible. But then by the time he gets done, he's going, but I trust you. My circumstances are so terrible, but you are so good, and I trust you. And so he finishes by going, God, I don't know that we can trust anybody around us. Everybody's closing in on us, but you know what? I'm going to lie down and sleep in peace tonight because you alone, O Lord, cause me to dwell in safety. How do you, on the first night on the run, when you feel like you are surrounded, you're about to be overtaken, there is no hope, how do you say, but I'm going to sleep good tonight, God? Because you always keep me safe. He'd spent 10 years on the run before. He'd been in hopeless situations so many times before. So no matter how hopeless this looked, he remembered God's faithful. He's so good. So I'm just going to lay down and go to sleep tonight, and I'll trust that he's going to take care of me while I'm asleep tonight. Man, that's a good word. He's grieving. He's crying out for help. But he's choosing to say, but I believe in the goodness of God. Psalm 3, which some believe is written on the following day as he's fleeing. David says, Lord, how many are my foes? How many rise up against me? Many are saying of me, God will not deliver him. But you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts up my head on high. I call to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep, and I wake again because the Lord sustains me. Don't you love that as the follow-up to, that's part B of that song. I said last night when I lay down, I'm going to sleep in peace, oh God, because you make me dwell in safety. The next day you get up and say, God, you are the one who surrounds me. You protect me. I do sleep in peace because you are faithful, God. That is a declaration of faith. Now, he didn't say that because anything had changed. He's still got a long way to run. He's got a fool chasing him and throwing rocks at him and cursing him. But God, you surround me. It takes faith when you're being cursed and dirt and rocks thrown at you and the enemy is chasing you. It takes faith to go, but God, you surround me. You protect me. He is constantly, even though he's acknowledging, God, I got a lot of enemies. There's a whole bunch of them coming after me. And you know what they're saying? They're saying you're not going to come through. They are saying, you aren't going to save me this time. That's what the enemy's always going to whisper in your ear, by the way. He's going to say, yeah, he saved you all those other times, but he ain't paying attention now. This is going to be the time he doesn't show up. And David says, no, I choose to believe God's going to come through again. One more psalm, the 62nd. David says, truly my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from him. Truly he is my rock, my salvation. He is my fortress, and I will never be shaken. When you're going through the darkest times, use David's example as a model. Now, here's one of the first things I'll tell you to do. I've practiced this myself. When you're in a dark and difficult season, pray the Psalms. Just that simply. Start in Psalm 1 and make that a part of your quiet time every day. Read them aloud. Make them your prayers. Some of them you'll read and go, what in the world did I just pray? I get it. The imprecatory Psalms are tough. That's where David's going like, God, destroy my enemies. Break the teeth of their children. Okay, those are pretty tough. But most of them you will relate to, and some of them will be such a relief to be able to just go, God put this here for us to be able to pray this back to him. Grieve. Feel the freedom to grieve and to express the kinds of things that David did. God, it seems like my enemies are surrounding me and they're saying you aren't going to come through. Are you going to come through? Grieve. Call on God for help. And declare your faith in God. It's a healthy thing to grieve in the middle of difficulty, but don't get stuck there. I always love the analogy of the windshield and the rearview mirror. Always remember, your windshield is this big. Your rearview mirror is this big. And that's how your mind needs to work. The windshield is big to keep you looking forward at what is ahead. The rearview mirror, it needs to be there because you always need to keep some perspective. You don't need to forget what's behind you. But it needs to be way smaller and only get an occasional glance just to keep some perspective. But don't get locked into, oh, woe is me, I'll never get over what happened in the past. Just keep a small rearview mirror, eyes fixed on a big windshield. You with me? Second thing, David embraced the help of the people that God put around him, and he would have died if he had not. When big trouble strikes, we need support. It's the great trap of feeling like, I don't need organized religion. I can just worship God and do life on my own. You're going to face some things in your life. If you try and do them on your own, they're going to overwhelm you. You'll be destroyed by them. David could not handle this without the support of the people who God put around him. And the thing that I'm just going to mention this quickly, but the thing that's so striking to me about this is who showed up and who didn't. There were so many key people that David had trusted and been close to. They abandoned him. But the scripture names so many of these people who did show up. 600 men from Gath and their leader. And David looked at their leader and said, guys, this doesn't make any sense. You're not even from Israel. This isn't your fight. Why should you get sucked into this? Just go back to your own country. I don't want you to die or to face this. And they're like, sir, your fate is our fate. We go with you. A bunch of foreigners. You look on down in chapter 17, it says, when David came to Mahanaim, Shobai, the son of Nahash from Rabbah of the Ammonites, don't get hung up on the names, it's where they're from. And Machir, the son of Amiel from Lodabar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, they brought bedding and bowls and articles of pottery, which tells us they didn't have anything they needed. They didn't have anything to sleep on. They didn't have anything to cook with. And they brought them all of these different kinds of food because they didn't have any food to eat. And he's got this massive number of people he's leading into the wilderness. And who is it that showed up to help him? Well, an Ammonite. Who are the Ammonites? Well, if you just back up about 3 or 4 chapters, the Ammonites are the enemy. David just led his army to kill 40,000 of them. And it's an Ammonite that shows up and says, sir, here's bedding and bowls and cooking pots and food for you. And the second guy who's helping to bring all this in is this guy from Lodabar. Remember that? We talked about Lodabar about 3 weeks ago. It's that place, the ghetto beyond the Jordan. The name means no word, no thing. This guy is somebody from the slums. And the third one is a Gileadite from Rogelim. It's a bunch of foreigners. It's not even Israelites that are helping him. I mean, some pitch in, but the people who get mentioned, most of them are the least likely people that you would imagine, and that's who God raised up to support David in the hardest season. And I know in my own experience, those were the 2 shockers. The people that I thought would always be my friends. I'm just being honest, and there's no bitterness in this. I'm just telling you the truth. When I went through the darkest season in my life a little more than a decade ago, the majority of people that if I had made a list of my 10 or 15 closest friends, the majority of people who would have been on that list, I have never once heard from in the past decade. Never a phone call, never a text, never a hello. And people that I had probably never had 3 meaningful conversations with stepped out of the shadows and loved me like we had been longtime close friends. I will never forget those people who stepped in and were there in that dark season. You can obsess over the people who should have been there for you, or you can embrace the people who are there for you. One of them is going to lead to a bad outcome, and the other one's going to lead to a really good outcome. God's got people around you who will stand with you and support you. And here's one of the good things about the dark seasons. You're going to find out who your real friends are. And that is the beauty of it. I mean, some of the people that you thought were friends, you discover what they really were. Jackie loves to say, everybody wants to ride with you when you're riding in a limo. But who wants to walk with you in the rain? You will find out who your real friends are. Not when you're riding in the limo. Not when you're the head of the company. Not when you're the pastor of a church that's got thousands of members. Oh, everybody's your friend then. But whenever you've had to step away from that and people are saying all kinds of things about you, then you're not in the limo anymore. When you're walking in the rain, you will find out who your friends are. And this is not about hating people and loving other people. It's about learning to lean into the people that God puts around you, and you will need people in your darkest season. And God will provide. God provided David with people that he needed. We've just got to choose whether we're going to focus on who abandoned us or who stands with us. The third thing that David did, and this is going to get a little personal here, but We need to hear this. David made his son face the consequences of his decisions. Here's the dilemma that David faced. He could have sued for peace and just said, look, I get it. You're the next in line for the throne. I've been ruling for 30 years. I've had my turn. I'll support you. I will throw in all my support for you, and we'll make up and call it good. He could have done that. The problem is, David knew that Absalom was in rebellion against God, against God's plan, and against himself. And he knew that there would be nothing right or good about pretending like what Absalom was doing was okay, and that if he had said, well, let's just make up and we'll just pretend like it's all good, that the implication of that to all of Israel would be, I actually support his disobedience and rebellion. And David knew, I can't do that. I don't want to see my son suffer, but I cannot stand back and fail to have my son called to account for the rebellion that he is leading. This is where it gets hard. My generation has a problem of epidemic proportions in terms of how we parent. We have been a generation of helicopter parents. We save our kids. We bail out our kids. We pay for everything for our kids. We step in and defend our kids as if they could do no wrong. And when they get grown, we still act like they're our kids to their peril. When our kids get grown and they're making terrible decisions with their finances, and yet we step in and bail them out every time they make a terrible decision. When our kids are grown and they make terrible decisions regarding their work ethic and their job opportunities, and we finance those choices and that lifestyle. When our kids make terrible decisions about immoral relationships, and we still support them and help to act like that's okay. When our kids make terrible decisions about what they drink and what they take and what they get hooked on, and we just come in and time again, we pay for all their court costs because they got in trouble with the law, and we pay for every time they go to rehab and pay for all this other stuff because now they've made terrible choices and they can't keep a job and they don't have a car, and we just keep bailing them out and putting a velvet pillow under their behind so that they never have the chance to hit the ground hard. And then we act so surprised that they don't turn to God and learn to trust God in the middle of that. Parents, here's the hard news. They aren't ever going to depend on God or trust God because we took God's place. We taught our kids, you don't have to depend on God. You can just depend on me. Oh, our words said, you need to trust Jesus. You need to depend on God. But our actions said, I'm the one that's going to bail you out. I'm the one that's going to save you. Instead of doing the really hard thing of saying, I love you, but you've made some bad choices, and you're going to have to live with the consequences. I've lived through the painful reality of watching rebellion for years, and over, God just pointed me to the same passage again and again, and it was the story of the prodigal. And over, God said again and again, you model what you see in the life of the father. He always kept his heart open to his son, but he would not chase his son. He would not go and say, well, here, let's make sure we pay for a room so he has a bed to sleep in tonight. Let's make sure he's got a meal to eat. No, Dad stayed back and let his son get desperate enough that he was wishing he could eat the slop that the pigs got. It was that pain and desperation that drove him to turn and come back. And when, as parents, we aren't willing to take those kinds of steps, if the pain and chaos in our lives is because we've got children or family members who are making terrible decisions, and we keep fostering the chaos and putting ourselves in a bind, straining every other relationship because everything is devoted to bailing out this one dysfunctional member of our family, we need to realize we're hurting everyone else and we're helping to keep this loved one sick. Because we're bailing them out and we're enabling them and we're teaching them to depend on us rather than God. I knew it would get heavy here, and I'm not trying to beat anybody up. At some point, we've just got to realize if we keep doing what we've been doing, we're going to keep getting what we've always gotten. We've got to make a change. And David found that grievously hard. But he had to do the hard thing. Fourth and final thing we'll mention is this. When it's all said and done, he collected himself, he weathered the storm, and he reclaimed what was his. He didn't feel like it. All he wanted to do was grieve the loss of his son. In fact, that's all he was doing until Joab came in and kicked him in the pants and said, "Get up and act like the king." I know you don't feel like it. I know this is hard, but God has made a way. Now do your part. Claim what is yours. You weathered the storm. Now step back in and claim what is yours. Some of you know this reality by experience. I know this one by experience. There is a point in time where God has gotten you through the storm. You feel like you're in a daze. You're going, I don't know if my heart will ever feel joy again. I don't know if I'll ever love again or be loved, or I don't know what's ever going to happen in my life again. And God says, it doesn't matter what you feel right now. Re-engage. Claim what is yours. There was a time in my life where I literally was like, I don't know if I'm capable of feeling joy. Don't know if I'll ever experience love. Don't know if I'll ever serve a church again. I don't know how this is going to work out. And when God gave an opportunity, and I'm stepping into pastoring and launching Freedom Church, I'm going to be honest with you, nothing felt right. Nothing felt normal. And the Lord just had to repeatedly say, just keep going. Just keep engaging. Don't worry about the feelings. The feelings will follow. Guess what? I've learned to love again. I've learned to feel joy again. I've learned to feel comfortable in this role again. I've found greater joy than I've ever known before. But there's an in-between time where you don't feel those things, that you've just got to re-engage in life and claim what is yours, because God's calling and gifts for your life have not changed. So step back in the game. Amen? Let's turn to Him together in prayer. Father, you know the hearts of people in this room who right now are struggling with the pain of huge setbacks, attacks by the enemy, losses that they've endured. And I pray that today you would pour out grace on us, that you would meet us at our point of need, that you would heal our hurts, that you'd pull some people alongside of us who would pull with us, support us. I just want to invite you right now in this quiet moment. Some of you are at a great place in life. Take a moment to say, thank you, Jesus. Thank you for the season that I'm in. Some of you are not at a great place. Do what David did. Just acknowledge, oh God, I need your help. I need you. If you don't come through, I don't know how to get beyond this. Tell him that you need him. And then do what David did and just say, I believe, God. I believe I can trust you. I believe you're going to get me through this. I believe that you're faithful. I believe that you'll be my protector. Oh God, we do believe. Surround us with your care. We trust you. We thank you for your help. We thank you for your guidance and your provision. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I surely hope that what you heard was relevant and helpful, and above everything, I hope that what you experienced today really helped your heart to connect with the heart of God. Now, if what you heard for you stirred up any questions or maybe led you toward some type of spiritual decision, maybe you want to talk with someone about something that's on your mind, I would love to hear from you. And so I would encourage you, reach out by email. At the bottom of the screen, you see my email address. It's mark@myfreedomchurch.net. That's not going to go to a secretary or an assistant. That'll come directly to me. I'd love to hear from you and talk with you about anything that's on your mind. And if in the future you're in our area, we would love for you to come and worship with us at Freedom Church. But until then, we invite you to access all of the sermon material that you find online. Again, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today. Hope that you have a great day.